Most people think motorcycling is about freedom, adrenaline, or escape. But what if something far more serious is happening every time you ride? In this video, we're breaking down what a Harvard-backed study uncovered about motorcycling and cognitive function, how daily riding may influence spatial reasoning, memory, and the way your brain processes the world around you. This isn't about hype, and it's not about how riding feels. It's about what actually happens inside your head when riding becomes a routine. And once you understand this, you won't look at motorcycling or your own habits the same way again. Researchers have spent decades studying how repetition shapes the mind. Certain habits sharpen concentration, others refine coordination. A smaller category does something more complex by activating several mental systems at once, over and over, without breaks. Motorcycling landed squarely in that category. Riding is not something your brain can put on autopilot. From the moment the bike starts moving, the mind stays fully engaged. Vision scans constantly, not just looking but interpreting speed, distance, surface changes, and the intentions of everyone nearby. That information never arrives in isolation. It has to be weighed, prioritized, and acted on immediately. At the same time, the body feeds the brain a steady stream of feedback. Balance shifts, vibration changes, throttle response and braking force signal what the machine is doing beneath you. None of that is background noise. It all informs awareness. Then there is coordination. Hands, feet, posture, and head position must stay synchronized, often adjusting within fractions of a second. Those movements are guided by judgment, not habit alone, especially when conditions change. Every ride also involves constant choice, lane position, speed adjustments, predicting what another driver might do next. These decisions happen quickly, relying on short-term memory and spatial judgment rather than careful thought. Put together, riding becomes a sustained mental workload. And that raises an obvious question. If the brain performs this kind of work day after day, does it simply cope or does it adapt? And if this is already making you rethink what riding is doing to your focus and awareness, hit the like button, drop some hype in the comments, and subscribe. Because if this kind of research-driven breakdown matters to you, that support is exactly what keeps us committed to bringing deeper, smarter content like this. To move past speculation, the researchers needed more than opinions or one-time testing. They built a structure that could follow mental performance over time, using routine riding as the variable, rather than isolated events. The study began by selecting participants who could integrate motorcycling into everyday life. Before any riding period started, each person completed a series of cognitive assessments. These initial evaluations created a clear starting point, capturing how different mental systems were functioning at baseline. From there, participants rode motorcycles daily for 2 months. The rides were not designed to push limits or introduce challenges. There were no special routes, no performance goals, and no instructions to change riding style. Consistency mattered more than intensity. Riding needed to function as a repeated mental task, not an occasional experience. After the riding period ended, researchers administered the same cognitive assessments again. This allowed direct comparison within the same individuals, reducing the influence of personality differences, skill level, or outside factors. Any shifts could be examined as changes over time rather than differences between people. The design avoided intervention on purpose. By observing normal riding behavior under a clear timeline, the researchers reduced unnecessary variables and strengthened the reliability of the results. With the structure in place, attention turned to which mental functions showed meaningful change. One area stood out quickly because it is engaged constantly on a motorcycle and leaves little room for error. Now I'm curious, based on what we just talked about, have you ever noticed changes in your own focus or awareness when riding became more consistent? Share your experience in the comments, because real-world routines often reveal patterns that studies are only beginning to measure. With that structure in place, researchers began identifying which cognitive functions showed the clearest changes. The first mental function researchers focused on was spatial reasoning, and it matters more to riding than most people realize. Spatial reasoning is the brain's ability to understand where things are, how they are moving, and where they are likely to be next. It governs distance judgment, depth awareness, orientation, and the mental map you carry of everything unfolding around you. On a motorcycle, this system never gets a break. Every moment on the road requires constant estimation. How quickly the vehicle ahead is slowing, whether the car to the left might drift, how a curve tightens farther down the lane. These judgments are not static calculations. They update continuously as speed, position, and surroundings change. What makes riding especially demanding is that spatial assessment happens alongside balance and control. The brain is not just tracking the environment, it is coordinating body position, steering input, and machine feedback while maintaining awareness of moving objects in every direction. That internal map must stay accurate, even as conditions shift second by second. Unlike tasks where spatial reasoning appears briefly, riding keeps this system engaged from start to finish. There is no pause button. Each adjustment depends on the last one, and small errors can compound quickly. The result is a form of mental work that is persistent rather than occasional. In the study, spatial reasoning was treated as a cognitive process, not a writing talent. Researchers measured how efficiently participants handled spatial tasks before daily writing began and compared those results after the writing period ended. The goal was not to explain the mechanics of writing, but to see whether repeated exposure to complex spatial environments aligned with measurable differences in how the brain processed space. The findings here set the tone for the rest of the analysis. Because while mapping space is fundamental, it is only one part of what the brain manages on a motorcycle. Another system operates quietly alongside it, handling information in a very different way, yet just as critical once the wheels start turning. Along with spatial processing, the researchers closely examined memory, but not the kind associated with recalling names or past events. The focus stayed on memory systems that operate during action, especially those tied to attention and short-term use. While riding, the brain constantly holds and updates information, the position of surrounding vehicles, a car that slowed a moment ago, a surface change just passed, an anticipated movement seconds ahead. None of this is stored for the long term, yet all of it must remain available long enough to guide immediate judgment. As conditions evolve, old information is released and replaced without pause. Navigation depends on this process as well. Even on familiar roads, riders rely on memory to anticipate curves, intersections, traffic patterns, and problem areas. That reliance is active, not reflective. Details must be noticed, retained briefly, and applied in real time. When attention slips, memory suffers, and decisions degrade accordingly. In the study, memory function was measured before the daily writing period began and reassessed afterward using the same tasks. This made it possible to observe whether repeated writing aligned with changes in efficiency across memory-related challenges involving sequencing, updating, and short-term retention. The researchers were careful not to overreach. They did not claim sweeping improvements or long-term enhancement. The question remained narrow and controlled. If a mental system is repeatedly called upon in the same way, does performance shift over time? With spatial reasoning and memory both showing patterns worth examining, the next step was to understand how the brain allows such changes to occur in the first place. When researchers try to explain why repeating an activity like motorcycling might be linked to changes in how the brain performs, they usually start with a basic principle of brain science. The brain adjusts based on what it is asked to do over and over again. This principle is known as neuroplasticity. Despite the technical name, the idea itself is straightforward. The brain is responsive, it adapts through use. Neuroplasticity does not mean the brain is permanently reshaped, or it describes a quieter process. When certain mental operations are used regularly, the brain learns to support them more smoothly. Pathways that are relied upon tend to become more efficient, not because they are pushed to extremes, but because they are consistently engaged. Focus, spatial awareness, and short-term information handling all respond in this way. What drives this process is not novelty or intensity, it is repetition. Activities that show up as part of a routine place. Steady demands on specific mental systems. Over time, the brain adjusts how it allocates resources to meet those demands with less friction. Daily motorcycling fits directly into this pattern. Each ride requires the rider to monitor surroundings, judge distance and speed, anticipate movement, and make rapid decisions while maintaining balance and control. These processes do not occur in isolation. Vision, timing, spatial interpretation, and memory are constantly working together in real-world conditions. When that same combination is activated day after day, it creates a sustained cognitive workload rather than a one-time stimulus. From a neuroplastic perspective, that kind of repeated engagement provides the conditions where adaptation can occur. It does not promise change, and it does not guarantee improvement. It simply aligns with what decades of research have shown about how the brain responds to ongoing mental demands tied to everyday behavior. It is also important to understand what neuroplasticity does not imply. Adaptation can be subtle, narrowly focused, and dependent on continued participation. The 2-month duration examined in this study allows researchers to observe short-term adjustment, not to make claims about permanent restructuring or long-lasting effects once the writing routine ends. Understanding this distinction matters. Neuroplasticity offers a reasonable explanation for how change could occur without exaggerating what that change represents. That said, no study exists in isolation. Interpreting these findings responsibly requires attention to context, methodological limits, and what the research can and cannot reasonably claim. Understanding those boundaries is the next step in making sense of what the study actually tells us. Making sense of this study means looking just as closely at its boundaries as its results. What the researchers observed matters, but so does the environment in which those observations took place. One of the first limits to acknowledge is time. The participants were followed for roughly 2 months. That window is long enough to detect short-term shifts in how certain mental processes perform, but it is not designed to answer questions about permanence or lifelong impact. Any conclusions have to stay anchored to that span. Another consideration is individual difference. No two writers arrive at a study with the same background. Some had more experience on 2 wheels, others less. Some lived mentally demanding daily lives, others did not. Baseline cognitive ability, work stress, sleep quality, and routine all influence how the brain performs. A before and after comparison helps reduce some of that noise, but it cannot erase it completely. What emerges, therefore, is a pattern across the group, not a promise for every individual. It is equally important to understand what the findings do not suggest. The data does not claim that riding a motorcycle automatically sharpens the mind, replaces other forms of mental exercise, or delivers the same outcome regardless of context. It does not prove broad causation beyond the condition studied. What it shows is an association within a specific routine, under specific circumstances, over a defined period of time. Pointing out these limits does not weaken the research. In fact, it strengthens it. Clear boundaries protect credibility. By resisting exaggerated conclusions, the study remains grounded and useful. Its value comes from precision, not overreach. When viewed carefully, the research adds one focused piece to a much larger conversation about how repeated cognitive demands shape mental performance. It does not close that conversation, it sharpens it. And once those limits are clearly understood, a more meaningful question comes into focus. Not whether motorcycling changes the brain in some universal way, but what these findings reveal about how routine, attention, and sustained mental engagement interact, and why that interaction matters more than any single activity on its own. If you're finding this breakdown useful, take a moment to hit the like button. And if you want to support this kind of careful, research-driven content even more, consider becoming a member for early access to our newest videos. It's one of the best ways to help keep this channel focused on substance over noise. This video started with a straightforward question. What does motorcycling actually do to the brain? Not in terms of enjoyment, lifestyle, or identity, but from a cognitive standpoint. By following that question through research rather than assumption, a clearer and more grounded picture begins to take shape. Within the study, riding is not treated as a passive experience. It is approached as an activity that continuously recruits several mental systems at once. Staying upright, reading traffic, judging distance, anticipating movement, and remembering routes all happen simultaneously. These processes rely on attention control, spatial evaluation, and working memory, operating together in real time. When that combination is repeated as part of a daily routine, it creates a reliable framework for observing cognitive function over time. The results discussed here do not suggest a single dramatic outcome or a universal transformation. Instead, they point to patterns that make sense given the task itself. Areas such as spatial reasoning and memory showed changes that align with the demands placed on them during writing. Those observations are presented carefully within the limits of the study's duration and structure without extending the conclusions further than the evidence allows. Taken as a whole, the research encourages a shift in perspective. It moves attention away from the motorcycle and toward the mental processes required to operate it. riding becomes less about the machine and more about the continuous cognitive work happening behind the controls. In that sense, motorcycling can be understood as a structured, repeatable form of mental engagement, rather than a purely physical activity. That framing brings the title into focus. Motorcycling does not act on the brain in isolation, and it does not guarantee specific cognitive outcomes. What it does offer is a consistent set of mental demands that can be measured and studied. And while questions about long-term impact remain open, this research provides a grounded starting point. Understanding how routine activities interact with brain function allows for better questions moving forward. Not only about riding, but about any behavior that requires sustained attention, judgment, and awareness over time. If this video has helped you see motorcycling less as a feeling and more as a form of mental work, then the next question becomes just as important. What other routines are quietly shaping the way your brain operates? To keep exploring that idea, click the next video to continue the road trip. Join our tribe by subscribing, and if you want to support the channel while getting early access to our newest videos, consider becoming a member. And if you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like the video. It tells the algorithm and us that this kind of thoughtful, research-driven content is worth continuing.